こんにちは。第6回地球圏国
Hello,
際
everyone. We would like to begin the RIHN 16th International Symposium. My name is Maëlle from the RIHN. I am a researcher at the RIHN. Today, on session is the Technodiversity Garden. So we will talk about Technodiversity of Life. So title for today is Garden Planet, Technodiversity of Life. And we have invited 4 speakers for this topic. And we will talk about garden in a broad sense. As you can see, the garden is where people can do interpretations and experiment as an agency of nature, and then living beings and plants, they are acting upon the garden. And we will see the gardens from that perspective, and also we will discuss the garden from the landscaping perspective, and also we'll cover plants being planted on gardens, and we are going to cover the vegetables as well. And the first speaker, I'd like to introduce the first speaker. First speaker is Chikahiro HANAMURA from Osaka Prefecture University. He is talented in various aspects, so it's very difficult to introduce him, but he's going to share with us the landscape theory as well as perspective of design. So I'm looking forward to his talk. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Hanamura-san.
Thank you very much. Let me share my slides.
Hi, すいません。花村です。今日は
My
デザイン
name is Hanamura. Today I would like to talk about the theme of design of perspective. I would like to first briefly introduce myself. I started out in landscape design research, then moved on to architecture and urban design, and moved on to the field of communication design based on philosophy and modern art. And finally, I am working at the Department of Management of Tourism and Culture, and I plan to start a new research project called Life Symbology. I developed a theory of a transcape, which I use as the basis for expressing my work as an artist as well as a researcher. I work on actual architectural and landscape works and also fine art works. I also do research on landscape of religious sites around the world, and sometimes I act as an actor in my own landscapes. Since time is limited, I would not be able to speak about all of my works, but the word landscape can be broken down into 2 words. That is land and scape. In other words, the relationship between the land and self creates landscape. There is someone to gaze the land in order for the scenery or the landscape to be born. So-called landscape design has, however, focused on the design of this land. In contrast, I have been studying and practicing what I call design of perspective to create landscapes by designing one's own way of seeing. The relationship between self and land becomes familiar over time and is taken for granted. For example, the roads that you see every day or the streetscape of the place where you live become fixed and are no longer objects to be viewed as scenery. When we reconfigure these fixed relationships, in other words, transform them, it can be said that a different landscape appears once again. When the relationship between self and land is destroyed and then transformed into a different form, a different landscape is born. I call this transscape. For example, we often see scenes like this. This is a manhole in a landscape, which we see every day. But when you do something like this, a different landscape appears. This is a shop work mainly for children, and the process is simple. You place the dolls in places of the city and take a picture of it. It is a simple method, but familiar places start to look different. This is a way to change the scale of perception of the viewer's eyes by looking at the environment through the tool of dolls. This is a normal scenery of a terrace of a cafe. But if you give it a title, Witches Meeting, a dull scenery, it can start to look differently. This is a work of a workshop using the technique of gardening called mitate. The rule is to give names to things in the environment by seeing as or mitate. By doing so, a normal thing can start to have a different look. This is a way to change the scenery by giving meaning to the environment and objects through mitate and by working on the cognition and imagination of the viewer's brain. In this way, a scenery is created by the relationship between self and land. The relationship includes the physical relationship of seeing with the eyes and the psychological relationship of seeing with the brain. The land and self can be abstracted and defined as the subject and the object. In this way, we can understand the landscape from four elements classified on two axes of subject and object and physical and psychological. In other words, the physical element of the object, space, and perceptions such as eyes and ears, which are physical elements of the subject, and cognition of the brain, which is the psychological element of the subject, and a sign labeled psychologically to the object. These are the four elements of landscape. The approach to space involves the addition or rearrangement of physical materials or atom. Normal construction and development fall in this category, and tools such as dolls or puppets approach perception and change the input to the eyes. The method of changing the meaning, like mitate, approaches the cognition of the brain. The last approach to symbol is to change their use or classification or code. This is the outline of the method of transscape, and based on this theory, almost all my works are based on this method. And I would like to introduce two of my artworks to you and show how our way of looking things can be changed. The first one is the work from a art festival held in the mountains. When we participated in the festival, the organizer asked us to totally change the way we look at the mountains. However, the budget was very small and we could not afford a large construction project. So we thought we needed to do something different. The art festival was held in May when the nature of the mountains were beginning to bud. And at that time, plants with very strange shapes were growing here and there in the mountains. We thought whether we could show these plants as if they were works of art. And we decided to insert the artworks at 30 locations along a walking route that takes about 30 minutes to complete. The visitors would carry a map showing the locations of the artwork and walk around the mountains. And when you arrive at the location marked as number 3 on the map and look around, you will see the scenery as shown here. So where is the work? Where is the artwork? It seems to be just a mountain landscape. In an art festival, there are usually sculptures and boards with explanations. However, there are no such things here, just a mountain landscape. Visitors to the site find it strange and head for the next point, number 4. Again, the same empty mountain scenery. You will see the same empty mountains again, and so as you move on, you try to find something, but it's the same view of the mountains. Actually, the plastic is shaped like this, and we prepared such large quantity of plastic plants inserted in the mountains. The first, and we inserted them into the mountains. Therefore, the visitors will have hard time to find these plastic plants, and they just go pass by. If the artwork is only in one or two locations, people think that they have missed it. But there are 30 points of artworks, and so people start to recognize that there's something wrong. And the plastic plants are not noticeable if you are just looking at them with your eyes. But if you touch it, you will realize that it is a plastic plant. And at that moment, the view of the mountain you had just seen suddenly looks completely different. So if this is plastic, which one is the real ones and which ones are the fake? It's very difficult to distinguish the real plants and the plastic plants. And actually, there are many natural plants that look very artificial. So these are many lotus leaves floating in the water reservoir along the walking trail. Actually, these are plastic leaves that I put. And however, when they are floating around in such large quantities, people think they must be real. People tend to not notice big lies. This is plastic rice seedlings placed in the rice paddies. During the period in this exhibition, these plants were dug up several times. I wondered why, and when I checked it, I found tooth marks on it. And to my surprise, a wild boar had come and dug it up. So I was surprised that the gaze of wild boar can be designed too. This is a pile of trash illegally dumped along the mountain walking trail, and we made plastic flowers blooming in its place. The trash is plastic, whereas these flowers are also plastic. So they're the same plastic. The former is called trash, and the latter is called the work of art. So what is work of art? What is the value of landscape? I may be scattering trash in the mountains under the name or guise of art. So I wanted people to think about it. I think art is an act of posing questions. In this work, there is also the question of what is difference between life and non-life. The plastic flower is merely a form imitating a plant. It is so well made that it is indistinguishable in appearance from real plants, but it is clearly not life. So in the mountains, however, the space inside these mountains is filled with life. I wanted to know whether we could sense the life or sense life when we insert token plants into this natural space. Almost everything that makes up the urban space in which we normally live is man-made. We recognize that to the objects around us as signs or codes. We are so accustomed to such symbols that we may see life as a symbol too. When we take for granted the idea of life as if it were an object, it becomes difficult to imagine that these objects on here on this tray was once life swimming in the sea. The life on this styrofoam tray is categorized under the code food, and when the expiration date comes, it is classified under the code waste and thrown away. Life and nature are process, and form is merely the result of the moment. However, we have come to see life only in terms of the form of the result, have we not? I thought that our way for looking at things might be opposite of what they really are. In order to question our way of looking at things, this work is a device that transforms mountain plants into code for artwork. When you change the classification or the code, the same object is changed from nature to a work of art. Is the mountain just a place where weeds grow, or is it a garden filled with work of art? Depending on how we look at it, it can look completely different. The following work is an installation in a large hospital. Hospitals are places where we are confronted with our own lives. Hospitals are where we go when we have a physical problem, and hospitals are where they save your lives. The lives of hospitalized patients are full of anxiety. It is difficult to share this anxiety with others. Doctors and nurses see a lot of patients and are busy running around every day, and it is difficult to share the anxiety of a patient even with the family members. There are hundreds of such patients in the hospitals. The rooms are separated from each other and conversation is minimal. And if But if I could communicate with such a large number of people, or if they could communicate with each other, I thought that they might be freed from such anxiety and loneliness. With this in mind, I created work for 3 large hospitals in Osaka. All of these hospitals have a large central atrium space. The large vertical hall of more than 50 meters allow many people to look at each other. The atrium is located in the center of the building and anyone can access to the window. However, there was no one looking out from these windows. In reality, this space was not actively used as it was just a space to let the light in. People did not even know that such a place existed, even though it was located in the center of the building. The relationship between the place and self had been fixed, and the landscape had disappeared in this case as well. The nurse who see this place every day also thought that it was a meaningless place. If we could use this space for more hospital rooms, we can help more patients, they would say. Some thought it was inefficient to leave it empty for nothing. Certainly, from the perspective of efficiency and productivity, that may be true. However, I don't think human life is made rationally. If we could do something to this place, maybe thousands of patients could communicate with each other, or thousands of people could communicate with each other. So I decided to make something happen in this space. I made a lot of soap bubbles fall from the sky. From the bottom of the pit, a mist was exhausted, and we used music to make miraculous phenomena appear for 30 minutes a day. Then a miracle did actually occur. That is, patients from all over the hospital rooms gathered at the window and began to point and look at the sky. Not only the patients, doctors, nurses, visiting family members, and even staff members gathered at the window to look at the sky. The people who gather there are diverse in terms of their position in the hospital, social standing, occupation, age, and gender. This photo was taken in a pediatric ward, and some of the children died in this scene. It made me think about the nature of the landscape, the scene that people see at the end of their lives. The doctors are lined up here in a row. And please look at this doctor in the center. Probably this doctor is a scary doctor, but at this moment, he was just an old man. Doctors usually stand in front of the patients wearing a mask for a doctor, or a mask of a doctor. But in front of these overwhelming phenomena, there is no point in wearing a mask. The time has come to communicate with patients as an individual, not as a doctor. Hospitals are places where people's bodies are treated. However, it is not medicine or surgery that heals the body. Life has a power to heal on its own, and healthcare is there to support it. Medical treatment deals with life, not with a body as a mere object. It is clear that the state of mind plays a major role when life is trying to heal. However, in hospitals, the focus is so much on the physical body that one wonders if the importance of the mind to life has been forgotten. Is there not a fixed view of life? Is the question. If the landscapes and art can support people's heart and help their ability to heal, then I think art could be a part of medical care in the future. So please look at this film.
これまで全く見向きもされてない場所でも一回
Even
見か
if you have never noticed the place, once you change your perspective, it turns into a garden. In this work, physical materials such as soap bubbles and fog or mist are inserted to temporarily change the space, thereby indirectly changing the viewer's perception of the space. When our perception and imagination change, our gaze changes and the landscape change from what it was before. In other words, the meaning and value of even ordinary places and environments change depending on who is looking at them and how they are viewed. However, this change in perception and awareness is the most difficult thing for us to achieve. The reason is that when we become accustomed to seeing a scenery, it also becomes the norm, and our way of seeing things becomes fixed. As we have discussed, landscape are created by the relationship between the environment and ourselves. In particular, the way we view the environment is what creates the landscape. When we speak of landscape, however, we usually refer only to the environment and separate our own view of the landscape from it. And this view of ourselves is the most invisible things for us. So when we have a problem, we think that it is the object that has the problem. We try to solve the problem by designing and improving the object. However, the problem may not be with the object. Maybe the problem is with the way we look at it. The same thing can be true for the current global environmental problems. There is a lot of living matters, life forms on the earth. We are supported by these living matters. Without these beings, we would not be able to live. But we see it in the opposite way. We place ourselves at the top and we see nature and other forms of life as entities to be managed and controlled from above. Are we not looking at nature as a system we can control, life as an object we can manipulate, and the earth as a servant we are about to put under our control? Can we solve the problems by not changing our view and by just using technology? This is the question. What exactly does sustainable mean? Does it mean that we will continue to receive gifts from the earth and not give any gifts to the earth? We need to think whose garden this earth is. There are various subjects other than humans that view this garden called the global environment. The umwelt for animals, plants, insects, and other life forms is different from that of humans. It is also possible that something like AI may become a subject to view the earth in the future. We need to humbly learn how these non-human subjects see the garden. As an approach to this, a different way of seeing may be necessary, such as first-person science, or the art created by life form other than human. The problem of how we see is a cultural problem, not a technological or systematic one. In other words, it is a matter of sensitivity or imagination and values. The view that humans are the masters and nature the view that humans are the masters and nature is to be managed and controlled. This is the concept of garden in which nature serves man. On the other hand, it can also be seen as a place where the garden is the master and humans work for nature. What we must seek from now on is a form of garden in which human beings enter into the circle of nature and learn from nature. This would mean that the scope of our democracy would extend to the other forms of life, or rather, I think we need to take the opposite view, that of more humble attitude that we ask to be included in the democracy of many other forms of life. Thank you very much, Hanamura-san, for your wonderful talk, and there were many surprises that we were able to experience through your talk. So we would like to entertain one question from the floor. May we receive one question from the floor? Yamagiwa-san, please. This is Yamagiwa. It was very interesting. I have many questions actually, but one question. You showed your hospital work, putting soap bubbles in the atrium, and people gathered in that area. I think this can be conducted with non-humans as well, or more than humans as well. That scenery was something that was different from the normal life, and I think you use that aspect with non-human animals too. When the view is not accustomed, if a new view is experienced, if the scenery is something that the recognition has not been established yet, animals can concentrate, although the perception has not been established yet. And this is very easy to control. From the third party's view, it is a moment where you can compile these viewers. Can you not use this idea? Yes. In that work, so the bubbles and the mist, the fog, was used. And I did not want to show it as a performance. I wanted to show it as a natural phenomena. And the motif is when there is a disaster, or when there is aurora, or when there is an earthquake or a forest fire, I think the attitude would be the same. If something different from the normal life appears, the response will be the same. Maybe in case of war, the response may be the same. With animals and humans as well, it is not good that the people cannot get together when there's something different happening. Even in the normal life, so there's a moment, if we can create through art a moment where something different happens from the normal daily life, I think that the people can get together. And that is the reason why I worked on this work. Yesterday, in the conversation between Professor Burke and Mr. Ingold, they said that the monkeys do not see the moon, but I see the monkeys see the moon on their way. It's the way may not be common with human beings, but they do see the moon. When there was a volcanic eruption in the next village, the gorilla and myself and the bushback, they were all looking at the volcano. We are in a tense relationship normally, but all together at that volcanic eruption, we were looking at the volcano eruption in the same way together. I remember that happening. Your talk was very impressive. I think as one concept, I think this concept can be utilized. Yes. I did this with humans and humans, but like animals and the forest fire or volcanic eruption, I think this can be done, a project conducted, or communication work that can be conducted between humans and non-humans as well. Thank you very much. There is a question raised in the chat box as well. So we would like to take that up in the discussion period. We would like to move on.
Next speaker is Mr. Kumazawa from the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature. He specializes in the regional planning and environmental informatics. Now I'd like to turn over to Kumazawa-san. Please start your talk. Hello, everyone. My name is Kumazawa from the RIHN. In my talk, I'll talk about the imagination and calculation to figure out a future human environment. As the Heinz introduced me, I specialize in regional planning and environmental informatics, so I'm not familiar with the thought or philosophy, but starting from 2019, with the help of the Toyota Foundation, I have been involved in joint research on this topic, which is the human environment with imagination and calculation. So I'd like to share with you some of the outcome out of the research. Now I'm trying to share my screen. Okay, thank you very much. So, first of all, now in a future world where computational knowledge processing is a norm, what will the environment be like for people? This is a question I would like to explore in my talk. In SNS and online game are everywhere nowadays. So things which are in a virtual world, event in a virtual world, are also part of our environment maybe. For example, over the last several years, one of the most popular online game is Dobutsu no Mori, like this one you see on the screen. In 2020, that Watsumare Dobutsu no Mori was launched. Here that non-habitat, well, the island without nobody lives, is a stage where they play a game. So they try to experience nature in this. So this is a field of nature which the game players experience. So that now something that is imagined and thought out, those can be embodied by digital technology that could be part of our environment, and also they interact with our lives. So then the question is that what is the environment? We are forced to think about it. Oh, anyway, the advancement of digital technology is actually accelerate embodiment of something that is emerging and conceived. The background of this is about process of converting information into matter. So let me talk about this. So converting information into matter, what does it mean? This is based on the discussion of Kubota. The first you have the aspect of digital information that could be converted into the aspect as a physical object. So you have the 3D printer, that is one of the example. So if you give data in information into the 3D printer, that will create a product. And that process takes place in living being as well. So this is example of a protein construction by ribosome. So DNA through replication, transcription, translation, then proteins are generated. But of course, there are some dynamic uncertainties such as fluctuation incidence, and also influence of the environmental parameters such as light, temperature, moisture, and nutrients. So therefore, the bioprocess is a bit different from the 3D printing process. But this is how the information is converted to matter, and the background of this process is calculation. So here, the new reality is constructed by computation. So this discussion is based on the Morita's discussion. So what is the activity of computation? First, that is to extend human perception, and also that is to lead to the information of new concept. And for everyone, computation is part of reality. So there's a future to be calculated, which include forecasting of the weather, forecasting spread of the virus, forecasting global climate change, and also future environmental impact of radioactive waste. So unless we extend our innate perceptions with help of computation, we cannot continue to think about objects, so which are called hyper-object. That's overwhelm humans' cognition.
このようにですね、仮想空間
So likewise, the virtual space and physical space, and now we see the expansion of the virtual space. That's the environment where we live.
さて、ここでは次のスライドのタイトルは計算
And title for this slide is knowledge processing, which is externalized to the computer. So as I said, world is now expanding, but I would like to reflect on that. So even the object of imagine is expanded, there are some constraints. For example, the resource constraints, which include an energy restraints and physical conditions as well as the constraints of the human beings' knowledge processing capacity. If the processing capacity is overwhelmed, then you have a computer to handle that. So my viewpoint, the knowledge handling is now detached from humans and capacity that is externalize the knowledge processing. For example, you can rely on other people, other organization, other region. You can outsource the knowledge processing to those different entities. Actually, there's another example that is automation by machine. And the next one is about you delegate knowledge processing to other agents and functions. So you can delegate that task to people with specific skills, technology, or maybe you can rely on AI. And if we look back to history, in our small project, we look at future, but we also try to understand something that is universal between the past, the present, and the future. And there are two field works which we are doing. One is the Ogimi village in Okinawa, another one is Oki Island. And in Okinawa, we organized together with Terada Masahiro regarding the food, local food, how local food has been changed and passed down between different generations. And within this workshop, we asked participants what they ate when they were a child. And people in this village said to us they liked the margarine rice. And also they drew some pictures like this one you see on the screen. So margarine rice, of course the margarine is a culture imported from the US, and somen noodle is produced outside the prefecture. So although those are products which comes outside the prefecture, those already have taken root. Another one is field work at an Oki Island in Shimane Prefecture. Here they develop new industry based on forestry industry, taking advantage of the specific technology and skills which reside outside their local community. They are creating a new industry using a local timber resources to create a new materials, which is the oregano. So as you can see, there are phenomena which rely on expertise that reside outside of their community. So even this is just some of the examples, but these examples represent that we can really think about future.
さて、そういった中で、一方でですね、実は豊かでリアル
And so imagination, the rich imagination, or maybe rich and realistic imagination is in fact supported in part by a wealth of knowledge. This is a picture I took today. So this is a wild plant, and then if I look at this plant, I can figure out what this is, meaning that we can't really name the wildflower or wildflowers growing in front of us. In this sense, their foundation for thinking about nature has become very fragile. But at the same time, that we see cases where people who have experienced the pseudo nature created in online games, like Dobutsu no Mori, sometimes get interested in their real life experience. And this is another game.
これはステークホルダーによってはこれがもしかしたら収納を促進するツールに使えるんじゃないかなと。
Maybe this game could be used to get people interested in the reality. So there are some expectation where those online games could get people interested in reality.
いうことで、
And we conducted questionnaire survey to see how our sense of reality is changing. So maybe there are signs of reality being changed in our society. So this shows the outline of questionnaires. We enrolled about 1,500 people, and then we adjusted their background, and this was carried out in 2020. I can't go into detail of the survey, but then in a nutshell, we raised some questions about information selections in daily life. For example, the land information, which land information is more realistic to the participant. Is that Google Map information or information obtained from book? Or which information is more important? Information comes from online, or information comes from your friends, or when you converse with others? Which mode of communication do you prefer? For example, online text chatting or in-person conversation? Well, about 20 participants say that communication on the text chatting is more realistic than in-person communication. That is quite interesting. And also another question is about the risk information at the time of disaster. So as you can see on the right, what is the preferred way to get information regarding risk from disaster? So do you like to get information from the AI, which propose the best way to evacuate, or AI which gives the ranking of different options of evacuation? Actually, more people chose the AI presenting them different options with ranking for evacuation routes, for example. So maybe people still wish to intervene in their decision when they need to evacuate at a time of disaster. And based on that results, we classify the respondent into different clusters. And as a result, we found 10 clusters. So what is important or particular here is that So which lullaby you wish your baby to hear, and well, the real voice of the standard thinking capacity or lullabies developed by AI, which is optimized for infant development. And those who are 44, 5 years old or higher were in this cluster, or excuse me, so the cluster with the average age of, yes, 44.49, in this cluster, the AI was preferred compared to the real human voice. Maybe the mothers who are raising the child chose the AI. This is just a speculation though. So now the online games, maybe because of online games, our perception reality is changing, or it's not only because of online games, but because of different technology might be affecting how we see the reality. And also I talked about the DNA and AI. And then now the question is that how we reconstruct the concept of things. So things include object of expression. So the object of expression, as I talk about margarine rice is the one of the example, and another one is documentary that Terada-san was produced, was shown at the workshop. That is another example of an object of expression. So here, the documentary features old man who's 100 years old, his daily life. Maybe with those objects of expression, we might be able to connect between the past and future, creating them, making them more like present. And part of our activity to create the object of expression, we developed a textbook to foresee the future, titled Conversation Making Teaching Materials for the Future Society. That is a production of society of the future. So it consists of 12 pages explaining how future society look like and their keywords. Based on those, we ask participants to think about their future society. So why I'm talking about this? So we carried out this workshop at a university using abstract keywords. Then we conducted another workshop at high school in Kyoto. And if you look at the result out of this workshop, well, in order to create worksheet for high school students, the high school teacher and we collaborated to make those sheets more aligned to their locality and their residential area. And the result is work is much better. So by having a locality into the sheets, maybe they found it easier to think about the future or imagine the future. So this is my summary. The object to be imagined and thought out have been expanded from local to global, from physical to virtual space. First, focusing on the past, I argued that externalization of knowledge processing is a key, referring to example of changes in local food culture, resource use. And also reality itself may be changing for us, and I showed some signs of the change and types of people who reflect it. And also based on the practice of using a booklet that encourages people to imagine the future, I discussed possibility that constraints of the locality may help us to imagine the future. So I discussed the environment for people in the future from the viewpoint of the phenomenon as a whole without distinguishing between the real and virtual and incorporating things outside that are processed by other entities and computers. Thank you very much, Kumazawa-san. We have about 3 minutes to go. So if you have any question, if anybody has a question.
なければ、
If there's no question, maybe you can think about a question for later Q&A sessions. So maybe you can come back. So let's move on to the next talk.
次の発表者は、地球
The
圏の
next speaker is Mr. Yoshida Takehito from RIHN, and he is an ecologist and limnologist, and he is the leader of the project with regard to eco disaster reduction, disaster risk reduction. So, Professor Yoshida, please. My name is Yoshida. This is an international symposium, therefore I have made my slides in English. Sorry for that for the Japanese viewers. But I will be speaking in Japanese. As the title says, it is the ambiguity of nature, traditional knowledge, and transdisciplinary approach. Ambiguity means aimai in Japanese. So it is the ambiguity of nature and also traditional knowledge related to ambiguity and also transdisciplinary approach with regard to ambiguity will be discussed with respect to disasters and ecosystem services in Japan. I would like to extract some of the examples in Japan to explain this concept. There are many non-Japanese participants since this is an international symposium. So first, I would like to explain Japan, the nature of a Japanese archipelago. This is a very long archipelago. So characterized by the ecosystems, including boreal to subtropical ecosystems, both in lands and seas. So the ecosystem in Japan is very diverse. Also impacted by the Asian monsoon, the seasons, 4 seasons are very clear, and also there is a rainy season, and we also experience typhoons because of this Asian monsoon climate area, and therefore there are disturbances as well as volcanic eruptions and earthquakes as it is located, as it is a part of Pan-Pacific area. So there is a natural disturbances as well in the Japanese archipelago, and this is related to the environmental conditions. This has brought about the diverse evolution of various living matters, and therefore there are various environmental conditions that makes plants and animals and various kinds of microbes live in this environment. Also, since the Jomon period, it is a nature that has been created by human beings. For example, Satoyama, the landscape of Satoyama, and also the seascape of Sato Umi. they have developed as a result of the relationship between humans and the nature, spending many years. Satoyama, Sato in Sato or means a village or a place where people live. And also in a broader sense, it is a place where there is human activity taking place. And Yama in Satoyama means the mountains. So where the people live and also the mountains. So both aspects are related in the Satoyama area. Sato, in case of Sato Umi, Sato of Sato Umi is the same as the Sato of Satoyama, and Umi means ocean or the sea. So in this area, there is a relationship between the human beings and the sea nature, the ocean aquatic nature. And this is Sato Umi, which can be translated as a seascape. So as a result of the relationship between nature and humans, there has been a lot of cultural diversity that has developed. For example, traditional food culture, including washoku, Japanese cuisine, so food and architecture. This is a local housing using grasses to build the roofs of Japanese houses, and there are many crafts, crafts, and also rituals as well that have developed in terms of tangible and intangible diversity of culture. So this is also related to the biodiversity, the cultural diversity and biodiversity. It leads to the biocultural diversity in Japan. This is, I think, one of the greatest characteristics of Japan. On the other hand, nature has given us much blessings, but at the same time, it has given us many challenges. For example, with heavy rain, floods can occur, and also landslides can occur. This photograph is of 2018 of the heavy rain in West Japan. In the latter part of the rainy season, there was a devastating damage by floods and landslides in the western part of Japan. More than 200 people passed away, and also more than 50,000 houses were destroyed. So this was a big disaster. These disasters, large disasters, are happening every year somewhere in Japan. And also, the ongoing climate change is predicted to cause more disasters, more frequent disasters, and heavier disasters, serious disasters in the future. As a countermeasure against these disasters, for example, for landslides and flood control, there has been many infrastructures that have been created or built based upon most advanced technology. Dams and concrete dikes have been built. Such infrastructures have been built, and this has prevented the damages from the disasters or reduced the damages of the disasters. On the other hand, such infrastructure does contribute to the DRR, disaster risk reduction, but there are trade-offs between disaster risk reduction and functions of natural and human systems. So with regard to before the civil engineering developed, the modern civil engineering developed in the modern ages, how did human beings cope with such disasters? There are traditional ways of coping with disasters that have developed in the long history of Japan. The key word is the ambiguity of nature. The the ambiguity of nature was deeply considered in order to cope with disasters in the Japanese history. We have to be aware of that, and that is one of the most important messages that I would like to convey today. So, how shall we interpret and understand this ambiguity of nature? As far as I understand it, there may be more ways of understanding, but there are various ways of ambiguity, and one of them is the functionality aspect. The functional ambiguity of nature. In the same natural environment, sometimes it can cause a disaster, but in different times it can also be blessings. On the left-hand side is during the flood. The photograph on the left-hand side is during the flood, but the same lake looks like on the right, like the photographs on the right-hand side, which provides ecosystem services. So there are such ambiguity of functionality. The next concept of ambiguity of nature is that the challenges and blessings are not independent. They are related with each other. In terms of natural blessing, the blessing cannot be provided or exist without the challenges, the disasters. There are many examples, I think, but one of them is this is the same lake that I showed you previously, and you see the flooding of the lake on the left-hand side. But as you see, the crucian carp on the right-hand side, crucian carp use wetland as a spawning habitat that are formed during the flood. So without the flood, these fish cannot reproduce and survive in the freshwater systems. So that is the relationship between the disaster or the challenge and the blessing. So fish, which is a blessing, and the flood, which is the disaster, is closely related, and they are dependent upon each other. The next concept of ambiguity is within our minds. Hanamura-san and Kumazawa-san also talked about the perception of human beings, and this is related to that. The relationship between challenge and blessing is also very much closely related to the people's mind, and that is the third aspect of ambiguity. An elderly person in a local area talks about their experience to the children of the local community. And they talk about the challenges and the blessings of nature, which includes lots of ambiguity. One example is one of the elderly is saying to the child, the river overflowed with water and fish flowed into the rice paddies together with the water. In May, when it rains, a lot of crucian carp comes up to the rice fields to spawn and so forth. So the children listens to what the elderlies tell them, and they have drawn a picture of the narration that they have heard from the elderlies, and this is also an opportunity to inherit the natural knowledge or traditional knowledge from one generation to another. So ambiguity of nature is in it to the interaction between nature and humanity. It is something that appears very naturally. And there are plentiful knowledge that is being inherited from generation to generation. But in modern age, such knowledge inheritance is being reduced. We try to avoid the challenge of nature, and we try to receive the blessings of nature. And there are various traditional knowledge of such nature, and we have compiled them to such booklets. And I would like to explain a few of such examples. There are other examples in Kyushu, Hokuriku, Sanriku area as well. And please refer to the website of RIHN to read about them. My first example is the Hira Mountains in the Shiga Prefecture. The mountains are very steep, and landslides occur in these steep slopes. This is a hazard map of Shiga Prefecture, and the yellow part is the hazardous area. So in many areas, there is many risks of landslides. Looking at the old documents or reading the old documents in this area, there has been many landslides occurring many times. For example, in 1692, a whole village was swept away by the landslides and mud flows. So you can tell how large the disaster was. However, such landslides can lead to be the resource of the local area, which is the stones carried from the mountains to the flatland, to the community through the landslides and mud flows. This is a very large stone wall made of such stones that have been provided by the landslides. And this wall works as a prevention or to protect the area from the further landslides. And also these are the forests that becomes a buffer between the mountains and the living area. And at the same time, this forest can be a habitat of many organisms and insects and animals. Ogawa-san, in the public session, will talk about the gardening. This area is a place where Moriyama stones can be found, and so this area is where this famous stone can be found. And so the landslides, the stones from the landslides are led to become the local stone industry. So this shows, this is an illustration based upon the interview of the senior stone masons, showing how stone materials are delivered, cut, processed, and shipped to different places on the Lake Biwa. Also, these stones create a beautiful scenery. Chart is used in this way. And also granite is used to build a large lantern and koma inu sculptures. So such a culture, how this also should be inherited from generation to generation is another topic. And our research group has been involved in this kind of field tours and workshops so that the next generation can inherit this very important traditional knowledge. And by doing so, within the local area, the natural ambiguity related understanding can be further enhanced, and the knowledge can be further inherited by the next generation. Another example is the Mikata Goko Lakes in Fukui Prefecture, north of Shiga Prefecture. In this example, floods occur frequently here. In 2013, such a flood occurred. This is a local museum document or information collected by the local museum. And as you can see, such floods have occurred frequently in the history. Looking at the past decades, such floods are occurring every 5 years. However, when we look at the inundated area, the traditional usage of land has prevented the inundation to occur in the residential area. So as you can see, the inundation is occurring in the paddy fields. The houses are built beyond that area. And because of the flood, local fish and dragonflies are being grown, or it has become a habitat of frogs and dragonflies and the carp that I have talked about. And also, it has been registered as a natural heritage as well. And also, such fish has provided various types of ecological system. And as you can see, delicious sashimi and soup and dishes are being developed because of such fish and animals that are grown in the area because of the flood or flooded area. And also, Mikatagoko Nature Restoration Committee is a place where such knowledge is being inherited and shared, and thereby maintaining the ambiguity of nature. So my conclusion is, ambiguity of nature is innate to the human nature interaction, and its aspects extends to functionality, interdependence, and inseparable perception. So there is functionality and interdependence, and also human perception, which is related in terms of the challenge and blessings of nature. We have conducted this research with many members of the team, and I would like to extend my gratitude to all of these people. Yoshida-san, thank you very much. We have about 5 more minutes left, so we would like to entertain questions. Please raise up your hand if you have any. We have seen a photograph of a delicious fish, so maybe we're feeling hungry. So maybe we can have a further discussion at the discussion time. Let us move on.
I'll switch to speaking English. Our fourth and final presenter is Maëlle CALANDRA from France. She's an expert on Southern Oceania and is going to talk to us about a special type of garden, very different, I think, from the gardens we have in mind when we are here in Kyoto, but home gardens, subsistence gardens in Vanuatu. Please go ahead. You're muted, I think.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, excellent. Thank you very much.
Sorry. So thanks for welcoming me today. I'm very, very honored to be part of this event. So today my talk is based on ethnographic data collected between 2011 and 2018 on Tonga Island in Vanuatu, which is an archipelago of South Pacific. So here I wish to illustrate why subsistence gardens are central to inhabitants and the role they play in that risky context. I will also present the different types of gardens encountered in Tonga, and also hope to offer insights on why they provide locally the threshold with which to measure and define disasters. So the archipelago of Vanuatu is known for being particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change and is commonly exposed to large environmental hazards such as cyclones, volcanic eruptions, landslide, earthquakes, etc. For the 7th consecutive year, it has been ranked as the world's most at-risk country in the world. And recently, the archipelago has experienced category 5 cyclone, which is the highest rank. So this cyclone was named Palm, and the trip of a massive eruptions in 2018 forced the evacuation of the entire island of Ambai, which is another island in Vanuatu. So interestingly, there is, however, no word in the vernacular languages that corresponds strictly to the notion of catastrophe. So this not mean that a disruptive episode with lasting consequences cannot be considered what is understood by catastrophe nowadays. To speak such an event, people use the Bislama term disaster, a word derived from the English disaster. The introduction of this word in Bislama is recent, since it was not present in local speech before the mid-2000s year. So disaster is commonly used by Tongoans to describe a variety of noteworthy events of various origins, humans and non-humans, which have a negative impact on the environment and can threaten human existence or cause irreversible loss, material, symbolic, human, and non-human. But to better understand it, let's first consider the social and cultural context of Tongoa and gardens. So Tongoa is the biggest island of the central group of Shepherd's Island. It is home to 2,300 people living in 14 different villages, speaking either Namakura or Nakanamanga, or both languages. The majority of the population does not have a regular salary, and their main income comes from selling cash crops, especially kava, at the island's, the main income comes from selling cash crop, especially kava, at the island's market or in the capital of the country, which is Port Vila. So let me show you kava. So kava is the main cash crop and is used to prepare the traditional beverage of the Pacific Islands. Having producing gardens is people's primary concern, as they also provide families daily nutritional needs. And according to my observation, more than 80% of the foods comes from the gardens. And for the poorest families, this represents 85%. On Tonga Islands, families often manage two different gardens. One could be called a specialist one, and the other one a mixed garden, based on the selections of plants grown in them. So in the first one, the one you can see on the screen, in the first one, only one or two varieties are cultivated. The main produce is yams, which is the most widely cultivated species, but also the only one with social importance. Indeed, yams are considered the noblest plant, the one which is distributed, exchanged, and eaten at all important social events. As a result, in the case of poor harvest due to bad weather, disease or devastating cyclones, no significant events such as chief ceremonies, traditional weddings, baptism, or funerals take place during the year. Meanwhile, the second one, the mixed garden, provides family daily nutritional needs and contains different variety of plants, such as banana, manioc, sweet potatoes, taro, kava, cabbages, pumpkin, etc. You have an illustration of this kind of garden on this slide. My ethnographic research shows that the sea is also considered as an extension of the land, and each family owns sea plots that could be described as sea garden. On Tongoa, land and sea are conceptualized in a common framework and understanding, and both these spaces contribute equally to building up ways of living and thinking for those who create them and tap into their resources. So this is an example of what is a sea garden on Tongoa. Although social and economic life depends on land and sea gardens, they are particularly vulnerable to disasters effects. That is why on Tongoa, a disaster is evaluated largely on the basis of the state of gardens, rather than in terms of the material damage caused to buildings and other property, as it is the case in the Western world, for instance. My ethnographic research reveals that the subsistence gardens is the principal frame of reference. It is when crops are wiped out by a sudden event, so for instance, cyclones, earthquake, drought, theft, animal incursions, sickness, parasites, etc., that the situation is commonly described as a disaster by inhabitants. The condition of subsistence gardens provides the threshold for measuring the significance and describing the nature of a disaster. The situation is considered even more catastrophic when a disruptive event happens between two harvests, or when it occurs several in the same season. If the garden provides for the daily nutritional needs of the family, the disaster endangers self-sufficiency, as it takes months for the plant regime to be reconstituted. Moreover, crops are sometimes irreversibly lost. For example, Cyclone Pam, the one happened in 2015 and was a Category 5 event, led to the total loss of 3 of the 18 cultivars of manioc that I had identified in 2013. Therefore, a cyclone that has not completely destroyed the gardens is not described as a disaster. On Tongoa, for inhabitants, certain disasters can be foreseeable, which means that certain indicators present in the environment signal the potential occurrence of a dangerous and devastating event. For example, Tongwans know that cyclones happen mainly during the hot season. They notice that trees are overloaded with more fruit than usual, and that just before cyclone arrive, the sky turns red, Fregata minor, a bird, fly hitters, and the weather is hotter than usual, etc. Tongwans also know the indicator of a potential resumption of activity from the nearby submarine volcano. The color of the sea surface turns yellow, and just before the eruption, it becomes red. The smell from the fumaroles below the village of Kurumambe, the northern village of the island, is also stronger than usual, and the hydrogen bubbles emanating from the caldera are much bigger. These hazards can be foreseen because they have a certain seasonality and are a kind of cyclical regularity and happen not suddenly but gradually. They provide the population the opportunity to prepare for them by taking preventive measures, cutting down banana trees and manioc before cyclone, or hiding in the middle of the island to escape a volcanic eruption. At the other end of the scale, there is the unpredictable disaster, which can take place at any time. There are no warning indicators in the environment. Thus, it always takes its victim by surprise. These kinds of disasters are particularly dread as also they are rare. People know that they will recur sooner or later and always afflict major damage. This is notably the case for earthquakes, which Tonguan says they cannot anticipate, or that of animal incursions into the gardens. In addition to this main distinction between disasters, inhabitants make a distinction regarding their nature. A disaster can be natural or made. Disaster can be positive or negative, and according to its perceived intensity. Into gardens, a disaster can have small and local or general and widespread effects on the environment. In addition, it may be described as being either a positive or negative event and may or may not reinforce relationship between villagers. Here, I will not have time to go further in this analysis, but this singles out a remarkable aspect of what can be considered a disaster in the context of Tonga Island, and give a glimpse of how people of Tonga think of their environment. So to conclude, on Tonga, facing these multiple disasters reflect a rich heritage of communities that have always attempted to overcome unexpected disruption and have developed strategies over centuries. The understanding of such strategies, which comprise a wealth of knowledge, could further analyze and mobilize more widely. Indeed, climate change and its consequences are pushing us to reconsider our existing modes of life to cope with changing environmental conditions. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I also want to thank you, the translator, for the translation. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That was very quick. You were the first to finish before the appointed time, which is great because it gives us a nice time for interaction. So first, I would like to ask if there's any questions for Dr. Calandra's presentation. Terada-san? Yes. Terada-san, please go ahead.
Hello, thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. Would like to ask you a question about the notion of disaster in terms of the garden. So, how the Tonga people, plant people, think about COVID-19. So it is I think the you said that in the Vanuatu, people think disaster as the something related to the garden or something related to environment. It's the same as Japan. In Japan, we think COVID-19 as disaster, but its particular term for it is the saigai or corona-ka wazawai. That term relates to disaster, not a disaster, but a kind of unfortunateness or some kind of still existent format of disaster. That is particularly using the term shinogram Chinese character using the water and fire, which is important for in Japan archipelago, as Yoshida-san mentioned. Flood is caused by monsoon. So our format of the disaster is the flood or fire. That caused the unfortunate thing to the villagers or the community. So in Japan, even the corona COVID-19 pandemic is dealt with in such kind of perceptual format. So I'm very curious about how the Vanuatu people think about disaster. And if you have some kind of information, I think that the Tonga people, not the Tonga, your island, but the Tonga, another Tonga, they have isolated policy for the COVID-19. So if the Vanuatu people did the same thing or not, I'm very curious about those reactions. So if you can inform something about that, it might be very informative. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you for your comments and your questions. Unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to go back to Vanuatu since 2018 because of COVID-19. It is hard to say how people describe COVID-19, if it's a disaster or not. I'm pretty sure it's not right now because they have been protected by the epidemic, by the pandemic. And it is not directly linked with gardens, so it's something quite different. I think it's perceived like something coming from Western worlds, and because they are very Christian, all the comments I saw on Facebook were about that, like we are like a well-preserved community and a well-preserved nation because we believed in God and God hear our prayers, so we are safe now. This is what I read on it. But yes, thank you for your comment about like the positive and the negative perception of what constitutes a disaster. And I was maybe too fast during my presentation, but yes, a disaster is never only negative. And with time, on Tonga, it is describing as a positive one. For instance, when I was in Vanuatu just after Cyclone Pam, nobody was describing this event as a positive one. But when I went back in 2018, nobody was saying it was a bad event. It was something now very positive because thanks of this major event, NGOs came, they received a lot of material. They were talking about development, a new Bislama term, like very important now, because people really want to be developed. They really want to have like a Western lifestyle. And so this is, for them, it was a very positive event regarding this, this aspect. And also cyclone are always describing as like positive event because they bring salt water into the land, and the mixture between salt and rain make the garden more fertile. And it's also the same observation for volcanic eruption with ashes, like ashes. First, they are like negative and acid for the soil, and they can enrich the soil and become positive for the cultures.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions about the final presentation? It doesn't seem to be the case, so I'm going to thank Dr. Calandra for the presentation and the Q&A, and I'm now going to invite all four of the speakers to engage in a panel discussion and perhaps respond to some more questions from the floor. And there was a question in the chat that I want to introduce briefly, partly because well, in its own right, but also
チャッ
because
トに書かれているご質問ですけれども、4人のプレゼンテーションは人、ヒューマニティと、そして自然との対応を示していらっしゃいます。少し驚いているのは、地球圏でよく私たちがディスカッションを行うときは、我々はその自然の一部であるというふうに捉えています。そういった文脈におきましては、藤尾大西さん、大西藤尾さんによるご質問であります。ノンヒューマンを民主主義に参加させるにはどういうやり方がありますかというご質問であります。民主主義というのは人だけのシステムなのか、あるいはノンヒューマンにも声を与えることができるのかということにも関連しています。花村さんのプレゼンテーションにも関与していると思いますので、まず花村さんの方からお答えいただけますでしょうか。
人以外のノンヒューマンを民主主義に参加させるにはどういうやり方がありますかと。民主主義自体。
So, how can we have non-humans to be participating in democratic system? And is it only the humans that have the voice? And does the non-human also have the voice? As I said at the very end, the human democratic thinking to be extended to non-humans is not the kind of thing that we should not consider, because I think non-humans already are democratic. So democracy does exist already in the nature, and we should be asking to be a part of it. So rather than non-humans to participate in democracy, I think it is the nature, the total living form is already democratic. They have already democracy. So we should be asking to be a part of their democracy. Professor Berg, you have your hand raised, please. I'm asking about the ambiguity of nature, ambivalence of nature. As the Japanese people know, shizen, in the Chinese character of shizen, which means nature, shi or ji is the self. And in the original Chinese language, it is a very ambiguity. Self-so is how it was self-so is how it was translated. The self, ji, at the same time. The nature that we see, the nature as an object, is also about oneself. There are various examples. So it is very, very ambiguous. Who is the self? What is the self? Is the question. And that is the question I would like to ask. Is this a question to Yoshida-san, maybe? To this question, Who are you asking this question to, Professor Burke? I'm asking everyone. So maybe Hanamura-san can respond to it initially, and then I would like to take over. This is a very difficult question. So shizen, nature, shizen can be read as jinen, so subject and object. So who is the subject? By looking at the object, we can confirm that I am this subject. So the relationship between subject and object can be ambiguous. And I think the question was, who is the subject and who is the object? So I am wondering whether there is an established subject. Because we think ourselves of ourselves, but I wonder whether we truly understand ourselves. It is very ambiguous. In terms of physical aspect, the atom that we are made up of 10 years ago and today is different. And so can we say that we're the same person 10 years ago and today? And also in terms of mind, our mind changes all the times. So the mind a minute ago and the mind right now may be different. So self a moment ago and self right now may be different. Because we want to confirm the existence of ourselves, that is the reason why we like large trees or stones which does not move. We look at these fixed things in order to confirm ourselves, and I think that is related to the religious sacred site. So I think the human subject is very ambiguous to begin with. Thereby, we try to express ourselves through art, and we try to confirm ourselves, and also we try to be approved or confirmed by the others in order to confirm our existence. And we have to confirm ourselves many times, or else the existence of ourselves is very ambiguous. So object and the landscape is very much related to the identity. When we look at the scenery of our homeland, we can confirm the existence of ourselves. And so subject, where is the subject? We do not exist ourselves as ourselves only. We are embedded to many things, and ourselves consists of various relationship. So that is how I think about it. I don't know whether it is a answer to your question or not, but that is what I think. Thank you very much. What Hanamura-san said right now, I am very much convinced. So as Berg-san said, in terms of subject and object, to separate a subject and object is very difficult to begin with. In a place or in a condition, in a scene, maybe we can separate subject and object. But when I think of myself as a person, I can become an object, I can become a subject. So it's more ambiguous as a individual, as a person. When do I think so? When I go to different communities, I observe and I listen how the local people look at the nature, see the nature. There is a nature as an object and nature as a subject. And also maybe we are embedded in the nature and maybe we are separated from the nature. These senses and feelings are very intertwined with each other, and it's very ambiguous. So when we think of a subject and object, if there is a certain condition, we can speak of subject and object in a certain condition. But as one existence, it is the concept of subject and object can be very ambiguous. Thank you. And Komazawa-san, would you like to say something? Hanamura-san and Yoshida-san has covered everything, and I agree to what they have said. But if I am to add something, so in this way, when we approach the object, by approaching the object can become a nature, I wonder. I would like to ask this question to Professor Burke. I talked about projection, tsutai, projection yesterday, and that's what I was talking about. By oneself, 英和辞典を見ますと、自らとおのずと are the same. So it is defined in the same way. So it's the same question.
Language-oriented discussion, but Kalandra-san, do you have any thoughts on this particular issue? No. Okay. So then we have a question in the chat from Anke Strauss, and if it's technically possible, I'm going to ask you to actually speak your question.
では、チャットでは、失礼。
Is it possible to unmute her? なんかじゃあ複雑だったら私が読み上げます。できるんですね。
Maybe I can read out from myself.
Do you hear me now?
Find it difficult?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I also don't know how to switch on the video, but I was very happy to listen to all the three presentations. And I'm also, I would like to thank you that you were all together in one session. And because I think it represents a drift or a discussion of approaches that are existent at the moment in tackling question of climate change and sustainability. And so there seems to me these two ways of dealing with them. One is technology, and that's very, for me, very Western way of approaching that, because it is, it is located in the notion, in modernist notion of control and efficient use of resources and space. And the other one is a cultural approach of living with nature instead of dominating it. And I was struck by the picture of the lake that could extend and then regress again. And in Germany, we had floods that were quite devastating, but only because people ignored that this space had to be reserved for the river, and thought they could control the river by putting more concrete into it. And so there has been this flood, and now they learned it does not make sense to allow housing at that spot. And but this knowledge has been forgotten. So there seems to be this kind of push and pull between technology and cultural practices. And at the moment, at least, I see that more technological solutions are again on the table, and that people kind of forget the cultural practices that allow more resilient ways of being with nature, because probably we cannot control nature in a way that we thought we would. And so what my question is, do you have an idea of how to reintroduce the value of these cultural practices into contemporary ways of dealing with nature, given that the Western way of, or modernist ways of living are still a fantasy that people are striving for? Thank you.
Any volunteers? Yes, Yoshida-san, please.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much for your question. May I speak in English? Also Japanese, excuse me. Thank you very much. You mentioned a little bit about my talk about the lake. So what is important, how we can approach? I think the first thing we can do is education. But what type of education can we provide? Of course, the education for children, and also education for adults. Maybe you can say learning rather than education, so maybe I should say learning rather than education. But of course, learning takes a lot of time, but we have to be patient to provide opportunity for their learning in order to reintroduce the cultural approach once again. Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to respond the question. I'm not sure whether I understand totally about the question, but I think education is very important. And here, imagination is very important in providing education. That is a key. Listening to other speakers, well, they talk about disasters in their talks. So disaster is a disturbance that comes every 100 years or every 1,000 years. That it's basically outside the daily lives. People cannot imagine that large-size disaster, but when it happens, actually our predecessors responded such a disaster in the past, and that their wisdom, their knowledge should have been passed down by different generations as a form of culture or tradition. So the question is how we're going to imagine outside our daily lives. Maybe art could be one way, or making smoke inside a hospital, or creating bubbles inside the gardens of the hospital. That is basically outside our daily lives. That's actually involve imagination of people. Maybe you can train people's imagination capacity by using arts, forms of arts. Maybe technology, well, excuse me, the virtual thing maybe a tool to train our imaginative capacity, as KUMAZAWA-san said. But my concern is, so because our daily lives is now in a virtual world, but maybe we could be also exposed to the disasters which comes from the virtual world. For example, like information disaster that could happen to us in the future. So if that's the case, well, this time we're talking about the gardens. Gardening is a space where we extract the blessing of nature, excluding any hazard from nature. So what is the blessing of nature? What is a hazard from nature? We have to have an imagination, how to imagine blessing of nature and also hazard from nature. But KUMAZAWA-san said about a contemporary way, I think a pseudo environment or virtual environment could be a way to train our imagination. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
You want to say something about this particular?
I just want to thank for this very interesting comment and question. I'm not sure I have any answer to offer, but when I was listening your answers, I was thinking about Vanuatu. And in Vanuatu, people deeply rely to their subsistence garden. So they know, like, they are really good with meteo. For instance, they know very well the 8 different winds that can happen during the weeks, months, year. And every wind brings a specific thing to the garden. Sea, sun, rain, humidity, strong wind that sometimes can disrupt the culture, everything. I live in the countryside in France, but we live now very far from nature. I mean, I know only 1 or 2 words of wind, and I'm not sure if I can say there is a seasonality for these winds and what they can bring for agriculture. So I think there is like a huge gap between people that still rely on their food, the food they cultivated, and like me, living in the countryside, but like I have tomatoes or lettuce, but I'm not rely on what I'm cultivated. So I think maybe the first step is to, I don't know, like the relationship with our nature is like so different. So I don't know how we can move to something different now, because also knowledge, they like some knowledge they have lost about meteo, about disaster, about gardening. I don't know, but it's a very interesting comment, and I have no answer, but I'm happy to think on it.
Thank you very much. KUMAZAWA-san? Okay. Augustin Beck, please go ahead.
So if I may address a few words in English to a French lady. We had a tradition in France in geography, in human geography, in Vidal de la Blache School of Geography, to write huge theses in regional geography. And these were mainly about such traditional ways of linking the human with nature. But now geography has become something else. It has become rather a social science, and which is not so much concerned with the problems we have been talking today. So one thing I suggest is that we read again those theses which were written around, well, in the first half of the 20th century.
Thank you. Sorry, I was distracted a little bit. It was pointed out to me that 2 people raised their hand. For some reason, they are not visible on my screen, so I've ignored them. But I want to give Ilan Chabai and Yamagiwa-san both a very brief opportunity to ask a question or make a comment. Maybe Ilan, you can go first.
Oh, I think that Yamagiwa-sensei was ahead of me.
So, sorry, I'm not able to see that, but please go ahead and keep it not too long.
Okay. A quick comment, which was about the sort of a confusion in my mind regarding the idea of democracy and the question of participation. What I find important is that there's a distinction, at least as I see it, between what we talk about as democracy, as a process that we engage in and that humans engage in, and the question of representation, in which nature is certainly part. And I would make the distinction that both humans, including future generations, and non-humans, nature in broad sense, participate, if you will, or are represented in our thinking and therefore in decisions, but and they must be represented in making our choices. But that's not, in my mind, what I would call democracy, because there is no active participation by the non-human and by future generations. The important part is that in our human process, which we call democracy, sometimes closer and sometimes farther from an ideal that it is, it allows the representation of others in that set of choices and decision making. Thank you for the presentations. I really appreciated them and just wanted to make this clarification. Thanks.
Thanks. That was very good. Yamagiwa-san, 最後のお言葉になると思いますけど。
This will be the last words of this session. Thank you. I was most interested in the following. Hanamura-san talked about the trandscape, and Yoshida-san talked about the ambiguity of nature, and they are very close to each other. And what Kumazawa-san said is quite different. So trandscape and ambiguity, it talks about landscape. We understand that there are different aspects of landscape, and we do not change. We are not changed. What I have experienced in Africa, in the Gorillians, and I have experienced becoming one of the gorillas. I have changed. Humans can change. In case of Hanamura-san and in case of Yoshida-san, you have joined different communities, and you become a different yourself in this different community. And to nature, you do not change yourself too much. You think that the nature change, and the aspect of nature change. That's what you think. But actually, we can change too. Kumazawa-san's virtual world. In the virtual world, we change. We ourselves change. And I think we can apply this. We can change to different human beings, but we cannot change to the scenery. That's what we think, but that's not true. We can change. And with the modern technology, as I say, the parallel world, we can change in the modern technology. Satoyama and gardens have that potential to let us change. And we need to apply that. Humans need to change in nature. The positioning of us can be changed in nature, and we must do that. In the Western modern concept, way of looking at the world is not the only way of looking at the world. So we need to consider different aspects. That was a wonderful statement as our last comment of this session. And with this, we would like to conclude this session. We would like to begin the next session in 13 minutes. Thank you.
はい、皆さん、こんばんは。
Okay, good evening, everyone. Hello, good morning, wherever you are. This is public session for the day 3. We have just completed academic session, so I think we are all excited, and we wish to discuss a little bit more in the academic session. But in this public session, we are going to look at garden planet, the technodiversity of life from different perspectives. So we wish to move on our discussions on this topic. And we have invited 3 speakers. They belong to totally different areas of research. First, we will listen to their presentations. Then, based on their presentation, we will further discuss about garden planet. I'd like to briefly introduce 3 speakers. First is the Monica Gagliano from the Southern Cross University of Australia. On the day 1, we had a talk between Yamagiwa of RIHN and Sugisako of Kyoto Seika University. In their talk, we have discussed a lot about gardens. There are different types of gardens. There are different concepts of gardens in the world. And in our symposium, that we see a garden as a place of social function. So when it comes to social function, it's usually seen as a social interaction between people, but actually we want to see it as a much more broader interactions between people with plants, stones, and trees, or between trees, between stones, and we are going to actually discuss that topic on the final day. And then Monica is, I believe, the most suitable person to talk about this type of topic. Looking at her book, that spoken the plant, that spoke the plant, the mind of plants. Those are very interesting titles, and she actually did research on the intelligence of plants. And then her talk for today is about the reciprocity. And second speaker for this session is OGAWA Katsuaki. Ogawa is a gardener. He's in the 12th generation. So he was born as a gardener. And he is engaging in gardening in Kyoto, Japan. And third speaker doesn't need to introduce because he has been involved in our event and he has already spoken to us in our session. So the Frédéric JOULIAN, and he's going to talk about the Waza of Japanese language, and he's going to talk about humans and non-humans and the shared Waza, and he's from EHESS of France. And each speaker will speak for about 10 minutes. Then we will have a panel discussion, and then we will take questions from audience. So the three speakers will also answer your questions. So first, Monica, are you on the line? So would you please start your talk?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you so much for inviting me and to have me here. I come and speak from Noongar country, so the land of the Noongar people, which are the traditional owner of this part of Australia, which is the western side of the big country. As you mentioned correctly, the word that I am bringing to the table is reciprocity, and I am gonna pull up some notes that I made to myself because this is an interesting word to me. I mean, all words are interesting and all words create a particular world. But the worst that can happen to a word is when it's misused. And so reciprocity, I think, is one of those words that has had this unfortunate fate and is being misused and misconstrued for what it really refers to. And, you know, in normal parlance, as I said in my abstract, when we think of reciprocity, we naturally think about gesture of mutual giving, caring, even sharing. And we frequently understand it as a mutually beneficial exchange within a relationship where one individual selectively helped another individual that would provide benefits in return. But reciprocity and exchange, although they're often used interchangeably, because they both create this mutual benefit within a given relationship, they're actually quite different. And they differ in motivation, they differ in intention, and they differ in attitude. So exchange was a giving that expected something in return. It's motivated by the self-interest with the intention of maximizing your own benefit from the relationship. So in a way, it's a what can I get kind of attitude. While reciprocity is motivated by the other's interests, and the intention is to maximize the other's benefit from the relationship. So the attitude is more about what can I give here rather than what can I get. So reciprocity is primarily concerned with the well-being, the giving to others fostered rather than what it was given or the fact that something was given at all. And it's while exchange is a bit more of a self-absorbed view and of the world, and it's got a sense of entitlement. It's like, I'm here, we are here in this relationship, and I'm kind of expecting you to give me. And so what can I get? Now, while reciprocity, because it's intrinsically about going out, so the giving, it naturally promotes a sense of happiness, not just in the one that gives, because we all know it's nice to give gifts, but also in a greater social environment around us. And by doing that, so in a real reciprocal culture and society, then whatever you're giving is already reflected back onto yourself. So in the giving, you're actually receiving. And so the question of like, what can I get doesn't even arise, is because you already know that you're being looked after. Now, the reason why I brought this up is because, as I said, I think that they're being conflated. So the two words are being used interchangeably. And but in a way, by conflating them, we are neglecting that they're creating two different worlds. One is a very restricted, narrow, human-centered view, while the other one, it's a bit more, it's broader, is more open. And so because at the moment reciprocity is being misused, at least this is my impression, and is being used as in replacing exchange, often when we talk about this within the boundary of this human-centered exchanges view, we often talk about the individual in question as implicitly being human. And but there is not a real good reason for this to be the case. You know, naturally, the world, reciprocity and exchange have long been limited to the human reciprocal sharing with other humans, under the premise that reciprocity or exchange requires individuals to cognitively compute cost-benefit analysis, which is, we think, almost a uniquely human trait. However, this premise is incongruent with the scientific evidence that we have. First of all, computation is not required in most reciprocal exchanges. And when required, and these are very special cases like calculated reciprocity, the ability to perform simple calculation is within the scope of many non-human animals as well. And besides, reciprocity in its true form is found and is widespread and is found pretty much across all species, from bacteria to humans. And so the real question would be, what would happen to the world if reciprocity was reinstated for its own real meaning of like, what can I give? And it was no longer limited to the human sharing with other humans, but it was extended to the sharing the humans can engage with other species and even beyond animals. So I guess I wanted to share a brief story that is my own experience. I was in the countryside here in Australia, in the bush, and I was walking with a group of people. One of the people with us was an elder, and at one point we passed a huge tree, and we are really in the middle of nowhere. We are walking past, and I heard inside my head, "Come and sit with me," and I just kind of stopped and then started walking again, thinking like, I don't have time. Everyone is walking ahead. There is no time for this stuff. But I verbalized it. I said it. I shared it with the elder that was just next to me. And he encouraged me to, yeah, well, let's do that. Then let's go and sit with it. And so we sat. It was only 4 of us out of the group that sat under this big tree. And we all had a very similar experience. And in my experience, what I was told by the tree was, I'm very glad to see you. It's been a long time. And I actually missed the presence of humans coming to sit under us. The question here is that the last time humans have been living in this area is something like 20,000 years ago. So again, in the context of reciprocity, there is no time. And the tree remembers the reciprocity with the human species was enriching both species. So the human enjoyed the shade and potentially, the food, and the tree, as he shared with me, enjoyed our presence there, our laughter. The two things that were exchanged were not actually of the same type, of the same even value, and yet there is what he's speaking of is not about the thing that was exchanged, but he's talking about the relationship and the bonding that was created, a bonding that transcends even time. And even if we as humans don't remember, others in that relationship do and can remind us. And so I'm bringing this up because I think that reciprocity has a very strong potential if taken seriously and across species, not just within the human-human relationship, to really bring us home. And maybe even change our attitude and how we connect to the world and how we interact with the world and how we might want to be in the world going forward from here. So I just leave it there. Thank you.
So Ogawa-san, could you start? Excuse me. So Ogawa-san, please. Hello, my name is Ogawa. As has been introduced, I did not have a free choice of my job. Since I was born, or since I was a child, I was brought up to be a person to create gardens. And very recently, I have realized that this is the most happiest job that I have. I think of the role of gardens. I often think, why do I make gardens? For what? Listening to your talk so far, we are part of nature. I should know that. And I want to become a part of nature, but I tend to forget. My role is that with garden, nature and humans can be linked with each other. Gardens can become a communicator between humans and nature, and that is the reason why I try to create gardens. This is a photograph of my ancestors, maybe 200 years ago. It is not sure when this was, but it is a photograph of my ancestors creating gardens. So pine was brought from the mountains to this area. I think it was a very difficult job. It's a very tall tree, a very big tree with very large roots. I can imagine that it was a difficult transportation. The pine can decay, if all of the roots are cut off. So with as much root to remain, and by reproducing the roots, the pine was transported to this area. It was not only one tree, maybe 3, 4, 5 trees. They were trying to transport so many trees together because the natural scenery was the only kind of its kind. And I am sure that they wanted to reproduce the scenery in the garden. So as a creator of garden, this is a contradiction within ourselves. To transport this tree, is because we want to become close to nature. We transport these trees to plant them in the garden so that we can come close to the nature. But at the same time, maybe it's a feeling that we want to conquer the nature. We want to control the nature. We want to maybe control the nature for ourselves. So garden making has both sides. There are pros and cons, and I don't know what is right and what is wrong. But as a creator of gardens, I have a conflict in myself. To create a garden, is it going along with the nature or are we going against the nature? So by transplanting this tree, the natural scenery is changed into another formality. And to move the trees to create a garden, we are creating a garden with a good intention, but the natural scenery is being changed. And so a multiple site of the nature is being changed under the name of creating a communicator between nature and humans. We want to make humans happy, and that is the reason why we create the gardens. But is this a correct activity? Garden does not complete itself instantly. This is a process of the transportation, the move of the trees to the garden. And from here, we plant the trees, and it takes time for this tree to root itself in this area. So with the root expanding and with more branches extending, it becomes a part of the land. It takes time for this tree to become a part of the land. And so with time, the nature accepts this land as a part of its nature. And this is only a starting point. So the movement, the transportation of the tree itself has a lots of conflict within ourselves. And sometimes we forget that we are part of nature. So the tree that we are looking at right now should be considered that it might be a tree that was transported by our ancestors to this place. So the garden that my ancestors created was quite different from the gardens in the past. My great grandfather created this garden, and he wanted to fulfill the enrichment or the richness of the nature, the wind blowing through your face, your cheeks, that should be recognized by the people. And the water surface is floating, and you forget the time is passing as you look at the gardens. This enjoyment of viewing the garden should be appreciated. This is Heian Jingu Shrine, the pond in the garden of this shrine. It is comparatively close to nature. It is man-made, but it is a very natural-oriented garden. And it has a man-made form as well. And these are the stepping stones across the pond. What I wanted to say here is these stones. As you step on these stones, the scenery that you see changes as time passes, as the season as the season changes, and maybe there may be fish swimming in the pond, and maybe the wind changes the view of the surface of the pond. And so it is a stage where you can recognize the nature, the changing nature. And maybe that is the purpose of these stepping stones. It is a pond next to that. You can't tell what part is the pond or the sky or the water. Maybe it doesn't matter, but maybe this is impossible. But because in our daily lives we spend less time watching the sky. But if there was no sky, this sky on the surface of the pond will not exist. Far ahead, we see the mountains. Before, it was the sky being called in to the garden, but we are now looking further to extended towards the mountains. The trees of pines were again brought from the mountains to this garden. And what we see far ahead is the mountain where there were many, many pines. However, as you can see in the photograph, today there are no pines in the mountains. A certain insect has killed the pines in the pine trees in the mountains. But I can imagine in the past, if the mountains were all pines and the pines were built in the garden, there was a continuous flow of the pines from the garden to the mountains, and the gardens could be seen as a part of the mountains. And beyond that, you can see the blue skies. So sometimes I look at the garden, imagining that if there were no mountains, if there were no skies, but that will lead me to see a scenery of the garden, which is very lonely and very sad. The gardens can exist because of the skies and the mountains, but it is a reality that the pine trees in the mountains have gone away, and we only have pine trees in the garden. We have protected the pine trees in the garden from the insects that have killed the pines in the mountains. So this may be is something that opposes our intention to become part of the nature. I don't know what is the correct answer. Another garden. This is a garden in Murin-an in Kyoto. Is it a man-made scenery or it is a natural scenery? We do not know, but this is a scenery that has been created. The mountains far ahead were filled with pine trees, but they are less, very much less today. So looking into the garden, there are special seats to look at the gardens. There is a place in called Tokonoma in the Japanese houses, and by sitting in front of Tokonoma, you can get the best view of the garden. You can see the garden from the facade, or shall we say the front side of the garden, and this is the best scenery of the garden. Right now, the flowers are blooming, so you can see the flowers. But if there were no flowers blooming at that point of time, you will not know what the scenery is all about. There is a pond beyond that. It is filled with the grasses, so we cannot see the pond when you are seated. When you stand up, you can see the pond, but when you are seated, you cannot see the pond, and the grasses are covering the pond. But as you walk through the garden, you can see the pond. So the scenery that you saw from the tokonoma of the house, you were not able to see the pond. But as you walk through the garden, you can see the pond. But sitting in the house, you can feel the atmosphere of the pond. And as you walk through the garden many times, the shape of the pond does not matter to you any longer. The atmosphere of the pond gives you this sense that assimilates you into the garden. So you can feel the pond from afar and close by. And as you walk through, there is a small fall. It's somewhat a man-made fall. And also the best seat that I talked about, from that seat, you cannot see the fall nor the pond. But there is a fall that was created. And here you see another scenery. Is it natural or is it man-made? The condition has changed. The sky reflected upon the pond and the color of the trees and the lights, how they are reflected upon the pond or the water. Depending on these conditions, the impression that you have of the garden may vary. So the creation of the gardens of my ancestors are based upon this philosophy. The expression of the garden changes according to time. I have not lived 50 years yet, but I learn from my seniors. And with regard to gardens, the trees in the gardens live for hundreds of years. And the stones can live for millions of years, and the land has lived billions or trillions of years. So there are things of several decades, there are things of billions of years. So surrounded by such a senior of myself, we live in this world, and we are learning from the seniors who have lived so many years. And so I think that is also a part of the function of gardens. Thank you. Thank you, Ogawa-san. I know that we have many questions. And as Monica said, well, to Monica too, I'm sure that we have many questions, but shall we move on? Are you ready, Frédéric? Frédéric, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I will try to share my screen. Could you hear me? Oh, sorry. Could you see the share screen? You see the share screen? Does it work for you?
最初のスライドにして。
Could you go back to the first slide?
I'm on first slide.
The front page. I think you're on the second slide.
Yes, the first one is this one.
Please start full screen.
Please start the screen, someone said.
I already started.
Now we can see the edit mode.
Edit mode.
Frédéric, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So if you could just please stop your screen sharing once and then restart it, and then it will most likely be okay.
Sorry. Sharing screen. Sorry. I'm just trying to deal with. So I stopped.
So if you could just restart your screen share and then start the slideshow from the beginning. And at the upper left, you have the start button.
Could you see? So I've started.
Yes, this is okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the inconvenience. Okay, I try to be brief as Abe-san, and thank you very much for sharing ideas about plants and gardens. So right now, we'll try to raise the question of human and non-humans according the concept of Waza. And I will move from first to just remind the different topics we have raised for the last 15, 20 years long. We worked on nature of man, and I think it's relevant for the present day symposium because we worked on internal dimension and external dimension. And in 2011, we also worked on the idea of gesture. And if I put Geste and Matière book just in front, because the small object represented is what I called an eco-fact. An eco-fact is an amenity. It's a part of the environment used for a purpose, but not a mobile object. It's opposite to artifact. And I think the idea of eco-fact and of body techniques should be a very important concept to tackle our aim for this symposium. I just put also the book we have presented in Shikuken a few years ago, Fixing the World, Réparer le Monde in French, in which we explore together in a collective way, in fact, the question of excess, of waste, and how to innovate from waste. So it was the first trend into the symposium of today. And lastly, perhaps the one we just published is on Waza. Waza, the ineffable, indicible art of learning. So with my colleagues, Daniel Knights, who participate to this book, we try to find new path. But just before going ahead, I just wanted to remind you the Japanese, in fact, first attempt to raise humanity question, and by contrast with Occident, in Japan with Imanishi and Itani, primatologists, Japanese researcher, in fact, studied the animal behavior to raise humanity questions, the origin of culture, the origin of rituals, the origin of sociality was tackled by studying animal behavior and by innovating in a new way to be linked with the animal in a, I would say, in a peaceful way. At the same time, in the 50s in Occident, we were still observing animals behind the bars in zoo. So what is the problem with human and non-human? It's of course the question of limits. What is an animal? What is an animal? What is a human? And this question of limits, in fact, relates to an ontological viewpoint, to an essentialist viewpoint of the world. And in this talk, we try to develop, I would say, a more behavioral way to think about human and non-human. And a phenomenological response, I think, is one of the favorite we can develop to in fact, to overcome the question of essentiality. So this kind of dichotomy should be, in fact, tackled in different ways, because we live with, and the dichotomy culture-nature, animal-humans, culture is always dominant. So the question we are raising here, universalist questions, are in fact secondary in most of debates. We have to remind that. Of course, when we question about humans, and now we invented new labels, almost human, non-human primates. At each time, it's in fact to face, to study non-human by privation. What non-human primate, what does it mean? In fact, it does mean nothing. It's just a category made by scientists to try to distinguish and not to work in continuity. So now we need to work in continuity, and I think the behavior is the best place to work in continuity. And when we look at chimpanzee behavior, the one at right, it's chimpanzee in a tree cracking nuts with a tool. The second one in Gombe is a chimpanzee modifying a twig to get ants. In those two cases, we have something that we call material culture. And this type of material culture could be shared with other non-humans, pre-humans, for example. And chimpanzee models could be useful to understand first human behaviors. And this scenario is made from discovery made in South Africa, where Homo erectus was using twigs to get termites from their mound. So how to understand alternative way, it's to understand that first humans were insectivores and not only carnivores as we thought before. So looking at what people do, what animals do, in fact, it's more important and more complex than defining human or animal for themselves. But in some cases, it could be tricky. The picture I took here came from Ghana, from central Ghana, where people behave and live next to monkeys. And even they buried monkeys as human, and they put posts and name them. So these animals are not animals. They are para-animals, they're almost humans. They are ancestor for humans. So the significance of animals and nature in different places in the world is more rich than we think. But if we only look at that from material culture, from elements, I would say in 100 years further, we were unable to decide who buried these animals. So material culture should be criticized too. Now, why I came to the idea of Waza? Because in different languages, the art of doing things has no name, has no word to describe it. And in looking at different words in different culture, we came into some concepts very interesting that can be used for animals and for humans. And that it works for Waza. Waza and milieu, of course. So let me try to go further. And let's stop for a while on a short video. It is chimpanzee in Montenyokwe in the forest of Ivory Coast, cracking nuts.
Frédéric, we cannot
Yes?
see anything.
Oh,
Even your
Sorry,
slide.
we can't see the slide. We can't see the video.
oh, I'm sorry. So I'm jumping. So I'm very sorry. The video is just was showing a very gifted chimpanzee, so gifted that it was able to hold very heavy stones and crack nuts with these heavy stones. So this type of knowledge could be shared with the community, but not only. He was very skilled and spent at least 10 or 15 years learning how to crack properly this very hard nut. And the lesson is that his skill was kind of Waza and should be in fact only compared to human best craftsmen in terms of ability, in terms of skills.
I'm sorry, Frederick, to jump in like this. Would you please just try and stop screen sharing and start it again? Because it's been frozen for quite a while.
Oh, sorry. I'm very sorry. I tried to go. Does it work again?
If you press the screen share screen button again.
I'm very sorry for that.
Okay, so now we can see it. Could you just try and please go change the slide so we can just see that it's not stuck? Yes, okay. So just leave it like that and don't start the presentation and just have it directly like this and we can follow along.
Okay. Just
sorry about that. Thank you.
It's okay. So sorry. So what I wanted to say that for some aspect of natural life and animal behavior, we need to use human concepts because they are so close to us, then we cannot afford and understand properly what they mean if we don't use human concept and vision. And in fact, it's kind of anthropomorphic way to think about nature and animals, but we need sometimes an anthropomorphic mean to get the knowledge and to be able to analyze what animals do. Now I wanted to give a different example from France and from plants, and it's directly related to what OGAWA-san just presented, because I'm always surprised by the way we excess, we waste the planet, and we exploit in so many ways. And in France now, in different cities, in different places, you can buy trees, but you can buy olive trees, for example, and you can buy millennial olive trees and replace and move those trees from Spain to France, from Italy to France, from Italy to Belgium or different places in Europe. You can find those majestuous and big trees. And there's no sense. In fact, it's not to make garden, it's to show that you have power. It's to show that you buy time and you get some legitimacy and some authorities and some authenticity by buying such big trees. So this way to manage in a global way about the planet is very problematic. I just want to come into, I think I'm perhaps too late, so it raised, in fact, the question of big and small societies, of locality and globality, and of course, as Maëlle CALANDRA mentioned it before, the loss of traditional knowledge. And when I was working in forest in Ghana, in the last forest of Ghana, people were still exploiting the last big trees in those forests to sell to France, to sell to China, to sell to Italy. So how to face extractivism and consumerism? Because the problem for me, it's consumerism. It's to keep the complexity, of course, and try to develop preservation of small worlds. In fact, to protect and develop ecosystemic and biotic in some cases nature in a city, and where the nature is mainly artificialized. But also it's how to learn from trees. This B-millennium cork oak tree next to my place in Provence, in fact, design his own existence, his own milieu. And now it's preserved, but it's on a private property. And in fact, it's perhaps preserved because it's in a private property. And we should enjoy his existence and share with it. So now what I would just want to evoke, it's another solution, is to study, in fact, pre-industrial craft activities. And we did that 2 years ago in Japan, working on washi. And we worked on washi in different places in Japan, mostly in Kurotani area in north of Kyoto, where we described the process of making washi from mulberry to the washi itself, to objects. And what we observe is mulberry fibers and pulp used to make water, screen, sugeta, and we describe that in a different manner, because science, even human science, is not well equipped to describe in a proper way. So we worked with Itsu Origuchi, who was a Japanese mangaka, and worked with Seika University. So we worked with Seika University, trying to describe all the process in a very detailed manner, to make this type of knowledge accessible to broad audience. We describe the process of making, and also in Kyoto, with Kojima lantern makers, the way to make objects from washi. So what was very important for us is that washi is in phase, is in total link with I will say a sustainable activity, and most of craft activities are like that. Yes, I will.
Yes, you still have a 20 more slide, but
no, I'm finished.
Time, you know.
No, I'm finished. So we did an exhibition on that, and I just wanted to finish by this picture I borrowed, I made in Kenya, because when Christine Webb talked about peace and reconciliation among primates, in fact, we have a good idea of what could be a social place, not only in humans, but also with in animals society and between humans and animals, like we can have in Chololo. So thank you for your attention and sorry for the technical inconvenience.
はい、フェデリック、ありがとう。技術的な問題。
Thank you very much, Frederick. Due to technical problems, we couldn't see the slide, but that's evoked our imagination. But thank you very much. It's actually good practice to resort to our imagination capacity. So we have a limited time, and I have a question. Maybe Monica-san has a question for Ogawa-san. So Ogawa-san talked about the Japanese gardens, and Ogawa-san's family has been doing gardening for over 250 years. So from your viewpoint of reciprocity, do you have any question for Ogawa-san?
Well, more than a question is like how beautiful, to have a history that still speak of this relationship. And I'm pretty sure that for what I understand, is like it's hard work. So I'm pretty sure your ancestor and yourself wouldn't do it unless there was a deeper sense that there was a relationship that you were cultivating and growing, and not just the garden because for the sake of having beauty, which in itself is also like a beautiful thing just by itself. So yeah, I guess the question, the tension that I could hear in your presentation was this: like, is this right or is this wrong? Is this nature working with nature or working against nature? And which, of course, in the context of a reciprocal relationship is like, what are we giving back when we are transferring a tree from a different place to make a garden? Or what is the garden gifting us when we are sitting in the perfect spot that is the best spot to appreciate it? And so I guess maybe if you wanted to comment on, from your experience, what is that? What are those moments that are moments of tension? But usually those moments of tension are very rich. That's why they're tense. What those moments of tension could deliver in terms of how we might learn to respect the timing of the other. Like we both touched on time, I think, and our time can constrain or can totally be irrelevant or can be lost, like in a garden. So I was wondering, in your own experience, how would that translate in, I guess, in a relationship of love? Like, obviously you're doing this work and it feels to me like what I feel is that you love doing what you're doing. So how would you say that could be maybe shared and taught to others who don't care? And they've been disconnected from this relating. Thank you.
Waza-san.
Before answering your question, just want to share with you a story of a scenery that was very sad. In my neighbor, there is a street with trees planted on the same interval, and all of those trees were cut down several years ago and replaced with new trees. Maybe something happened to the trees. Maybe trees were too old. Maybe trees were a little bit dangerous because they might fall, or maybe there were some complaint from neighbors. And then, actually, after replacing with the new trees, some of the trees also died out, and then they replaced with another or new trees. And I thought, well, I was a tree I mean, plant it with the same interval, and then maybe I'll be told you are not necessary anymore. You'll be replaced with new one, and nobody will notice the fact that I was gone. I was replaced with another tree. Nobody really care about it. And I thought that that trees shouldn't have been planted in the beginning if that trees can be easily replaced with new ones. Of course, the conditions where we live is now changing, and also conditions where we can plant trees are changing in Japan, and also there are fewer trees which can be planted on the ground directly. But in your case, we are able to plant trees on the ground itself. But the many trees nowadays planted on the concrete, for example, with some earth coverage. But I believe trees should be connected with the ground because all the energy from the earth, from the ground, comes out of the trees which are connected to the ground. Maybe rocks are the same. The rocks are buried under the ground, and then when rocks come out on the surface, they emit some energy that comes from the ground. So from that way, we are able to be exposed to the energy of the earth. So when it comes to garden, if you have a plant on a garden, that plant is connected to the ground, and from the tree we can feel the energy of the earth. That's actually tells us the long time past, since many, many years ago. And of course, well, actually, I can't hear the voices of trees or rocks. Unfortunately, I can only understand the voices of the people. But of course, sometimes I make a wish to rocks or trees. Saying, for example, when I place a rock, sometimes I wonder where is the best place of this rock. In such a case, I eat lunch just sitting next to the rock. Then I speak to the rock. I have a wish. So you, as a rock, where would be your best place? Where your character would be best expressed? Please tell me. That's how I speak to the rocks. Or sometimes ask rock to walk to the best place for the rock. And actually, the rock is the senior. So we try to learn from rocks as well. Of course, for many people, I'm a bit a strange guy, but yeah, you could be a strange guy, but that is actually wonderful. Yeah, I see many hands. Frédéric, would you please make it short?
Yes, very
comment
short. Sorry, Mr. Ogawa. Yes, I was very, very interested by your presentation, and I will ask you perhaps an heretic question, but take it for a question for a foreigner. Could you imagine, in fact, new type of gardens blending, I would say, scenery purposes and contemplation way to behave in garden with gardens where we can plant useful, I will say, plants as the one I presented, kozo or mulberry trees, and in fact educate people to proceed and to work with some natural elements. Could you think that this type of gardens are possible nowadays in Kyoto, for example, when we have labor and contemplation at the same time, and learning from the qualities of plants and things like that? Thank you.
Well, as Monica-san said, that you have the conflict in your side, in yourself, right? So maybe thinking about the future, I think maybe garden could be a tool for learning of people. So your family has been always engaged in gardening for 100 years, but how do you see the garden, the possibility of the gardens in the future? Well, I always have such a conflict, but of course I'm a human being, but of course I wanna, of course, please people by designing my gardens. Therefore, well, of course, I first respect the nature. At the same time, I want to please people who see the garden. And when it comes to garden, and it's actually a place that reminds people of the importance of nature. So maybe garden could be a place for a learning. I'm not involved directly in designing garden for educational purpose, but gardens, of course, always teach us a lot of things. Water, trees, rocks teach us a lot of things. They are great teachers. Not only that, but garden, well, can, for example, teach us in a different way because gardens which was designed by my ancestor, for example, that from that perspective, our garden teach me something about ancestor as well, and also time. Both the gardens, I believe, are returning to nature as time passes. So as a human being should support that process, I wonder. So if you compare the life of garden to a life of a person, so if you make a garden from zero, then this is a baby garden. Maybe 1 year, 10 years after, 20 years after, then maybe 30 years after, well, the garden can become like 50 years old or 100 years old or 200 years old. So garden after 100 years, for example, I think that is very different from the one that was created right after it was created. So the garden of 100 years after is very different from gardens right after just being created. And maybe sometimes people say that we should rejuvenate the garden, old garden, make it a little bit younger. Well, I feel a little bit odd in that way because the natural gardens ages are 1 year every year. So although they change every year, but we shouldn't really intervene the aging process of the garden. And then garden still keep the time that it's being connected to the long time ago. And so gardens teach us a lot. Of course, the garden teaches us about nature. Garden could be representative of nature in one sense, but actually we can trace back to history. And sometimes I get message from my ancestor who created garden. Or much more actively, maybe for the next generation. Maybe we can pass on a message through the garden to the next generation. Maybe next generation can receive the message that we left behind on the garden. So that could be another possibility.
Thank you very much. So listening to what was said, I would like to ask a question to Monica. And Monica, you talked about reciprocity. You said that reciprocity can be misunderstood. And here we heard about learning, teaching and learning, which Ogawa-san stressed. So rather than reciprocity, maybe empathy. Empathy, it can be another concept. So to empathize with plants, to empathize with animals, to empathize with land and stone, because there is no interest in empathy. So have you thought of this concept of empathy?
Yeah, a lot. And I feel like empathy is the critical key ingredient to true reciprocity. Because the moment there is this connection, and as you're describing, is like it's not expecting anything, it's just immediate. It's just you feel the other and the other feels you. In that moment, you are already in a reciprocal relationship, because there is no expectation and nobody is expected to give or to receive or nothing. It's just that we are being together. And I think for me, empathy is exactly the bedrock upon which real reciprocal relationship can occur. And I guess this also reminds me, going back to the question from before about this tension, I think that maybe gardens are so good at reminding us of this tension between the intrinsic relationship that we know it's possible with nature because we are nature. So this empathic connection is at the essence of us. And then there is this, the construct that humans have created as we are separate and we are human, and then there are the non-humans or non-whatever others. And as Frédéric was pointing out, this artificial separation just to categorize things. And so as soon as we enter in that space, then we are also saying that we are not in relationship anymore. And so we are, if anything, sometimes, especially in science, I've experienced many times where, empathy is not even a word that we are supposed to use, especially with some others that are non-humans. And Christine Webb, who was speaking earlier, we have been collaborating exactly on the word empathy. And especially on systems which are not commonly recognized as close to us, from fish to lizards to plants to bacteria, and as Ogawa-san was saying, like even stones, like the land itself. But so I think that this tension that is emerging, and I was curious about, is as I was listening to the conversation, I thought, oh, that's what it is. It's like is this tension between these essential fundamental relationship through empathy, which brings us to a reciprocal way of being with the world. And then there is the other side, which is like, no, this is an exchange. I give you that and I want this. And so it's interesting how a simple garden can bring so much tension and so much entanglement with itself. And I love your comment on time, because again, I think time over and over again just reiterates that ultimately we go back to the essentials. So at the end, the tree, the big tree that was planted can be there even past the life of the human that was interacting with it. And or it can go because another, in this case, a little insect, can completely destroy it. And but the tree is actually still there, just in a different form. And from a empathic, reciprocal point of view, one would understand that it just is a change of forms, but everything is still remaining in that fundamental relationship. There is an exchange that doesn't require any words. So when you spoke about the tree or the plants get recycled and they're still there and they can still teach through the garden, we can still teach a lot of things. The teaching doesn't even have to be necessarily explicit for us to find a sign that says, oh, this is what this tree is for. I mean, that's interesting, but I think the teaching is in what you have been at least this is how I perceived it, what you have been conveying when you're saying, you know, I'm listening, and sometimes I even get a message from my ancestors to tell me, like, go and have a garden over there, or I sit with the stone and I ask the stone to tell me, where do you want to go? I think this is, to me, this is a moment when you are entering not in an exchange, but you're entering in a reciprocal meeting where you're actually, your best interest is for the rock. You want to make sure that the rock goes in the right place, that the rock wants to go to. And in doing that, it's actually creating a beautiful garden that then gives you the, you see, you make good gardens. So in that space, everyone wins. There is no, I get this or I receive that. It's just it's a constant flow. And I don't know, maybe that's why we are obsessed with gardens. I think we've always been obsessed with gardens because they allows us in a very immediate way to have this reminder that we are in this constant relationship. If you don't look after your garden, even if it's a simple garden with a few herbs for, you know, for your meal, those herbs most likely are not going to make it, and the garden is going to die. So the garden is asking you for the love, and how beautiful it is when the garden gives, like, oh, now you can pick my flowers, or you can pick my herbs. And so there is this exchange of love, but it's a constant communication, and I love that.
ありがとう。フレデリックにもちょっと技とのそのレシプロシティと、あるいは
Thank you. With regard to empathy and Waza relationship, I'd like to ask Frédéric later, but before, Yamagiwa-san has his hands up, so let's ask him to ask his question first. So I'd like to ask Ogawa-san and Julian this question. Nishida Kitaro, a philosopher of Tokyo University, used the word of Hercules, saying that nature hides. And Ogawa-san said that looking from Tokonoma room, you cannot see the pond. But not being able to see the pond, you can feel the atmosphere of the pond, he said. So I think there are such intention hidden behind many gardens of Japan. Look at the form which has not a form, and listen to the voice which has no voice. That's the feeling of the Japanese people, he said. So non-human living forms, the atmosphere of the non-human living forms are sensed by the Japanese. I think that that's the essence of the Japanese people. This is very difficult to do. Maybe this is hidden behind the garden. That's what I would like to ask Ogawa-san, if my interpretation is correct. And to Monica, you're a primatologist, so you talked about anthropomorphism. So we are not looking at the nature, bringing the nature close to us, but in case of chimpanzee, well, in my case, I become a gorilla to look at the gorilla from a gorilla perspective, and I try to feel the atmosphere of the nature, which is not sensed by human beings, but only by gorillas, because nature has many things hidden. And this cannot be seen from the sense of value of the human beings. So we try to become another animal in order to find the secret behind this. And that is Waza. So this is a question that I have. I'm sorry, this is a question to Julian, Frédéric Julian. So Ogawa-san, in creating gardens, there's this feeling to create this atmosphere. This is a very difficult thing to do, actually. And as far as I know, to create an atmosphere is maybe almost impossible. I just pray for that and hope for that. And with that, maybe this can be created. The gardens that I learned from, the gardens that have been created by my ancestors, hundreds of years ago. And these gardens are gardens that cannot be created in this day, because gardens will not draw attention unless it is attractive in a sense. It has to capture the spirit of the people at a moment, or else the gardens will not be attractive to many people. But even if you can attract the attention of the people at a moment, the attention can be lost in a sense. I don't say cherry blossoms and maple trees, all that, but unless you are brilliant in capturing the spirit of the people, unless the gardens are interesting, the people will not pay any attention to the gardens.
But maybe the sensitivity you're talking about is maybe the opposite of that. So that kind of emotion or sensitivity cannot be recognized at the glance, maybe the second glance or third glance. So once they see it many, many times, maybe they will feel it. And I sometimes go back to the same garden many, many times. But such a garden is usually a very simple garden, doesn't attract the attention quickly, but in just a moment, well, sometimes when I change my viewpoint, you see totally different sceneries on the same gardens. So those who have such a sensitivity can sense that it looks like a time capsule. That's how I see the garden in that way. Therefore, that is not for everyone. Only those who have a sensitivity to it can sense it, can notice it. But that maybe fall from the sky. It's very difficult to express, and actually it's very difficult to intentionally design such a garden which can attract people emotion or invoke people's sensitivity. Thank you very much, Frédéric.
Yes, how to answer this general question? Thank you, Yamagiwa Sensei, for that. We share together this kind of experience of animal in a forest, and with chimpanzee. I did work on two types of chimpanzee: habituated one and non-habituated ones. So with the habituated ones, where I worked with Christophe Bush at the beginning, I observed animals. They were there, they were accepted, we were accepted, and we were able to watch them. And everything was focused by my vision. And when I moved to a second group, non-habituated, I have to learn by myself the forest. I have to sit for hours, for days, for very long time in the forest, listening the sound, listening the animals. And I learned like that. And also after by mimicking. And what is perhaps, it's in link with Ogawa, it's a way to mimic nature. You can mimic nature to understand, to reproduce, to enjoy it. And we can try to mimic animals in a way to develop some of their qualities. But we have limits, of course. We are biped. And for me, it was very difficult to have the vision of a chimpanzee from a tree to the ground. And they move in the trees and they move in the ground. How can I imagine this type of vision they have? It was very difficult exercise, but I have to understand that to understand the way they move in their space, the way they represent their space. So I think mimicking it's a way to understand too. And in some places it's easier than in other places. In tropical rainforest, it was complicated. But in savanna with baboons, it was much easier and have the vision of the whole group at the same time. And with baboon, I feel peace. And I feel peace for the first time, even in my own societies with humans. I never felt this type of sensation I've got with in a baboon society. And it wasn't the same in chimpanzees. So we have to experience different worlds, different animals' worlds, and different biotype, in fact, milieu, fudo. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, ありがとう。そしたら、モニカさん。
Thank you very much. Monica-san, do you have any other comment or questions?
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to add to Frédéric. Well, I'm not a primatologist, but I'm an animal ecologist by training, and I also had I think that these are very deep existential experiences that we are having when we are field scientists and we go in the field and enter those milieu and enter those spaces. And really what we are trying to do is to really be present there with what's there and become really part of it. And for me, it was actually with fish. And I think the way in which happened for me, because of course, I mean, like fish are so totally different from us. So it feels like it could be an even harder possibility to engage with. And so what happened was, and maybe because there is water involved, that instead of me having to make the effort of sitting there and trying to enter into the fish world, well, it was actually the other way around. The fish world entered me. And so it was in this penetrating of the human, and for me to allow this penetration from the other, which is again fundamental for the empathic relationship, that there was a moment, which I don't even know how long it lasted, but there was a moment where I felt and I understood that the fish knew me. And these fish were wild animals on the reef, and they knew me, and they knew me better than I knew myself, because I was in the water, not thinking about having this kind of relationship with a fish. And yet almost by surprise, the experience penetrated me. And what that penetration did, it changed my life. And when I hear you, Frédéric, saying like, I felt the peace that I don't really feel anywhere else. Well, it's that transformative relationship where we are touched or get in touch or touched by the world, the real world around us. And again, it goes back to that tension of like, I think that this is what we're looking for. We're looking for this sense of peace because it's actually touching back our own essence. And in these spaces where this tension really is felt strongly, we know that there is something there for us. And well, we are conflicted because we don't know how to enter or allow the other to enter us. What the fish did for me, it changed something inside me that then allowed me, because then I started working with plants, but I'm not a plant biologist or a botanist at all. So, but it was, and I think that's why my science with plants allowed for me to ask different questions that were not really asked until then, because the question were not coming from me alone. It became a co-creation, a collaboration with these others. Because what the fish told me was basically, can you be an open, permeable space where others of different kind, it doesn't matter what form they are, can enter you. And by doing that, then a plant can talk to you and you can collaborate with a plant, or a stone can work with you and collaborate with you in creating a garden. And so I think that what the question was beautiful because it's touching to me, it's touching to the very core of what we've been trying to go around, the three of us, for the entire conversation. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for your comment and your sharing your experience. I got the same experience with fishes and with dolphin because I do observation also on marine environments. But we have to think of what we should do with such attitude, because you can be a predator, and if you want to be a good hunter in Africa or in France, you should behave in the same ways as the animals in some cases. So it's what do we do with our Waza, with our knowledge, with the animals, of course. That's the purpose of our meeting. So that's just a brief comment. And I saw Daniel holding his hand. Thank you.
ありがとう。そしたらもう時間が。
Okay, thank you very much. I think time has come already, but Daniel's hand has been up for a while. So Daniel.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Monica. Yeah. Thank you for your last comments. And even though I know that time is very short now, I was wondering. I saw that you are working on a new project which is called Resonant Earth, and I wanted to come back to this idea of listening because it has been running through the conversation. And I wondered, even though time is very short, if you would say a little bit more about what that project is, and maybe how it relates to what we have talked about today.
Okay, I'll try to be very brief. It is about deep listening, and this is about listening to all of the world, all of them, all of the others that are around us, including the land itself, the country. And this concept of listening to country in Australia is very strong, and the experience is very clear when you are out in the country. And the resonant part of that is not just the listening, but connecting to the resonance, which from the word itself means like coming in tune and sounding together, which again speaks of a relationship. It speaks of changing our behavior so that we can match each other, so that we can enter into the real world, because at the moment we feel like we are living in a separate world that is not the real world out there. And so Resonant Earth is the idea of Resonant Earth is to develop both from a scientific perspective, from an educational perspective, and I come to realize that the third perspective is probably the most important and primary right now, from a well-being and spiritual perspective. So how do we change our awareness and our consciousness so that we all can experience, when we go to a garden, we can all experience the land, the ones that are living there. We are all having a meeting and not just some of us. How do we cultivate that? And through my own personal experience with the plants, I have been exposed and come across and learned various processes, I guess, which are traditional indigenous processes, which I think are really still very, very much useful today. And so Resonant Earth as a concept is wanting to bring this vision of taking what we have always known to connect back to the land and the others that are living with us on this planet. And then from that space, create acoustic, practical, even technological solutions for the regeneration of the planet. But I don't think the regeneration can happen if it comes just from us. Those others, some of these are much older than us. Actually, most of them are much older than us. They have beautiful answers and lots of guidance to give us. So I think that we need to be humble enough to ask, and then work together as a co-creation from there. And I guess I've started doing it with my science more recently. It's a different way of doing things. And so it's not easy. It's not, probably it's not going to be acceptable for most of us for a while. But what I observed is like, it works. So I'm 100% committed to put everything in this, because basically, what else can I do? So yeah, that's Resonant Earth. Thank you for asking.
ありがとう、モニカ。
Thank you,
リス
Monica. With regard to this project, Resonant Earth, and from the perspective of Waza, Frédéric, and from the perspective of Garden, Ogawa-san, and of course RIHN, ourselves are very much interested in your project. I hope that you will involve many people to that project.
ちょっと技術的な問題があって、
Because of the technical issue,
議論ができ始めたところなんですけ
it's
ど、
time that we have begun to have a very heated discussion, but it is time for us to close. I'm very sorry for that.
ないんですけど、まだ最終日に議論することが
On the last day, we have some time for further discussion, so I hope that we can continue this discussion. And of course, in the next 2 days, there'll be many ideas and many stimulations that we will be receiving. And I hope that we have significant time then as well. So thank you for today. Thank you to all of the people concerned, and I apologize for the technical issues. And let me give you some information for tomorrow, 5 p.m. Japan time, 9 a.m. French time, and Boston, New York, 3 a.m. The academic session will be beginning. So see you tomorrow once again. Thank you very much. We will close today's session. Thank you.